If you have seen our videos how to organize anything and direct or delegate, you know by now that designing an organization amounts to answering 5 questions. What needs to be done? Who does what? Who talks to whom? Who gets what? And how do disputes and problems get resolved? You also know that in coming up with solutions to any of these 5 problems, one might rely on direction or delegation, based on a consideration of the trade-offs. So far we have been looking at fairly small and simple organizations with at most 2 layers, that vary in whether the group is directed by a single authority figure in finding solutions to the 5 universal problems, or the right to find solutions to those 5 problems is delegated to the group, to figure out through some form of consensus. But what about more complex organizations such as this? Or this? Or this? Don't worry, we'll show you how to understand this complexity by pointing to the underlying simplicity. Let's do a simple thought experiment. Imagine you are part of a small startup. As you know from the video on direct or delegate, this group could probably come up with solutions to the 5 universal problems through some form of consensus. They can be self-managed. But as you start growing in size and bring in more people with diverse backgrounds and experiences who must work closely together, at some point consensus will not work, and there will be a sharp rise in conflicts. You will then need to switch to a direction-based approach, probably with an appointed boss. That person will make final decisions on how to solve the 5 universal problems, and in particular will be responsible for managing exceptions when they arise. But what happens as you scale further? If the group becomes too large, complex, or different from each other for even the boss to manage them, we would say that the boss's ideal span of control has been exceeded. This is what happens as startups scale. They add more people who are strangers to each other, who come from different functional backgrounds and have different perspectives. And as a consequence, a single boss is no longer enough to manage the group. And that's how we get to multiple layers of authority. By adding a layer of bosses in between, we keep the burden of supervision on each boss within manageable limits. A different way to put it is that there are only 3 ways to avoid multiple layers of bosses to direct the organization. First, stay small. That is, don't scale. Second, improve the boss capacity to manage subordinates, increase their ideal spans of control. Third, make the boss life easy by making their subordinates easy to manage. Have people work together who are likely to get along and are unlikely to escalate problems and conflicts to the boss. Another source of complexity, besides layers that arise as you scale, is that there are different ways to compose the groups at the bottom layer. For instance, here we have groups that are organized by function. Each group has only marketing or manufacturing people. You might adopt this structure if you believe that the most important interactions that need to be actively managed by bosses lie within functions. This means each group is relatively easier to manage for the group-level bosses, because people within them come from similar backgrounds, but the dependencies and interactions between groups can create tensions that have to escalate to the top manager, making their job more challenging and reducing their effective span of control. In contrast, we might put people from different functional backgrounds together, as in a product-based organization. In this example, we have marketing and manufacturing people in each group. You might adopt this structure if you believe that the most important interactions that need to be actively managed by bosses are between functions that together produce a product. This means the groups can be fairly self-contained, so that there aren't many interactions or conflicts between them. That also means that the top manager won't be too burdened, because there won't be too many intergroup conflicts that will escalate to them. They are the first common boss for both groups. On the other hand, each middle manager now has a tougher job managing her own group because it has people from different backgrounds working together, which will make consensus harder and needs more active direction. Their spans will probably be smaller than the previous case. You might have noticed that in this product-based grouping, the people across groups from the same function might not interact much with each other, which means opportunities for reusing good ideas and avoiding duplication may go unrealized. This is sometimes called the silo problem. One solution is to have each person report also to a functional boss through a dotted line. A weaker form of authority. In this example, manufacturing employees report both to their group manager as well as to a head of manufacturing. This is called matrix reporting. Being managed by two bosses can be hard though, and there are other alternatives, such as building strong informal connections among people across the groups, which can produce similar results. We have just gone from simple structures of single two-layered groups to complex structures such as functional, product and matrix, with multiple layers of reporting. It might all seem very complicated, but remember, all that complexity comes from the simple fact that as we scale, it will be harder to manage through delegation. Instead, we will need direction. But no single manager can direct a large heterogeneous set of subordinates engaged in complex interactions with each other. Their capacity will be exhausted. That's why we need more layers. And the span at each layer will depend on how easy or difficult to manage the groups at the lowest level are. And that's something you get to choose by making the groups contain people from similar backgrounds such as functional structures or different backgrounds, such as in product or geographic structures. Finally, to solve the problems of silos between groups, we can rely on matrix reporting or informal connections in networks among people. Okay, using the concepts you have just heard, why don't you take a shot at deciphering what this reporting structure is trying to do?